I'm letting go of a couple of different things here that I am aware of. Okay, no, don't want it that way. There. Okay. All right, so bear with me, everybody. I usually try and take everything off my screen so that all I am seeing is my PowerPoint slides. Okay, so this one here. All right, as you can see on your screen, we are just about ready to start a Mercury retrograde, turning retrograde August 4th, 5th through the 28th, goes retrograde at 4 degrees Virgo, all the way back to 25 Leo. So first of all, here are some of our housekeeping slides. I've had this one for a while. You're going to see this. By the way, if you are new to my Mercury retrograde webinars, I go through a lot of slides fast. You will have the recording on YouTube that you can refer to afterwards if you want to pause any screen and take information down. But some of the information is basics, and I include that for new people so that if you're just new to learning astrology, you get a little more information to help you out. The Jeffrey Wolf Green Association of Evolutionary Astrologers is having another one of their online conferences. It will be October 3rd through the 6th coming up here. And if you look at your screen, today is the last day that you can get a $100 discount on the entire conference and receive the recordings and PDFs and everything else. So you will see that link right there on your screen. I think I speak Saturday night, and way before all the recent news, I was asked to speak on Pluto direct at the last degree of Capricorn in regards to the USA presidential election. Stay tuned. I'll have some slides on that in a bit. And the way things are going, I've always said Pluto and Aquarius is going to give us a few surprises. And so let's see how many more we may have. And I also last year did a 6-hour workshop on the 4 outer planets, all changing signs in 4 years, which is why I say that this is going to be a pretty active decade for us. And we're just starting in on it. So we've got it at a little reduced price if you want to go to our website and take a little more in-depth look at the 4 planetary ingresses we got going on. Mercury in 2024 spends 6 months in the element of fire, and its retrograde cycles take place mainly in that element of fire as well. Fire is related to the archetype of spirit, and having Mercury in fire signs for half of the year, it creates a lot of excitability. It creates a lot of energy in the whole world of communications, and being with that element of spirit, it can be a little bit I'm right, you're wrong, and we see that going on not only in the United States but in other places around the world. Now, why planetary retrogrades? It's a phenomenon from our perspective here on Earth. It's as if those planets slow down and reverse for a while before they go direct. It is a time period to throw off consensus conditionings with whatever that planetary archetype is. And it's an opportunity for us then to evolve into our natural relationship with that planetary archetype. Now, when we are dealing with that, you always will take that transiting planet and its retrograde cycle and it will relate back to where that planet is in your natal chart by house, sign, and aspect. And if you're one of those people who were born during Mercury retrograde, you get to have things a little sweeter than maybe the rest of us. Seems a little more in harmony for you to make better decisions if you're the natal Mercury retrogrades. So we have Mercury in Leo for 49 days. We have it in Virgo for 37 days. When Mercury slows down to do that retrograde cycle, it starts taking a lot more time to go through signs of the zodiac. And so those signs then become the flavors that Mercury retrograde will be dealing with over usually the course of at least 2 months, regardless of how many signs. When it's retrograde in 2 signs, it does extend a little bit past the 2-month time period total, as you see on your screen. This particular Mercury retrograde in Virgo-Leo, we're going to be tasked between handling the balance between work and play. What are your responsibilities? What are your things you want to do in the Northern Hemisphere when it's warm and we just want to have fun? Now, with Mercury, we're going to need the flexibility to go back and forth between work, play, work, play, work, play, however we need to. If you're a workaholic, I'm Pluto 2 degrees Virgo. If you're a workaholic, you have to learn lessons of how to create some rest and downtime and relaxation for yourself. Thank goodness Leroy and I go camping because I really can get away from all of my day-to-day details and just chill a little bit. If you're one of those people who just like to relax, if you're a player, and I mean that very broadly, then you may have some lessons in this retrograde cycle of taking your responsibilities a little more serious. So some of us need to balance with more play. Some of us need to balance with more responsibility. It's going to be unique to each of us in our own natal charts. And where exactly Virgo and Leo are retrograding will give you some real big clues on which of those spectrums you have to go to in order to have a little bit of that balancing. Now, here are the dates of the Mercury going into pre-shadow, it's retrograde, that interior conjunction with the sun, which is always the halfway point, the aha moments of any retrograde cycle. This one's going to take place at 26 degrees Leo, and I got a couple of charts for some people in which this will play up in their charts. And as you can then see, it goes direct and it has the post-shadow time period as well. So if you just go from pre-shadow to post-shadow, you can see on your screen here, you've got a full 2-month cycle again with those planets and how we are shifting all of our left brain consciousness. Here is the chart for Mercury turning stationary retrograde on August 4th, 5th. And as you can see, it is going to come just after the full moon that's going to take place at about 12.5 degrees Leo. And so the fact that Mercury's turning stationary retrograde in early Virgo cast doubt on whatever we are looking at with our new moon beginnings in our solar lunar cycles of life. Because Mercury is turning stationary retrograde so close to Venus, we are really going to be tasked with looking at our values at the beginning of this retrograde cycle. What is important to us in our life right now? Where are we having to review our value systems? Now, I always do the charts at 0 degrees Aries, and I always do them for Washington, D.C. And I like to use the natural zodiac because then it works for all of us, no matter where in the world we may be as we are looking at that chart. Now, one of the things that we're going to have coming up for us, especially the first square is going to be the interior retrograde conjunction. We're going to have Jupiter make 3 waxing squares to Saturn, the end of 24, the beginning of 25. If I remember correctly, I think I got this on an upcoming slide. We're going to have that Mars-Jupiter conjunction August 14th at about 17.5 degrees Gemini Pisces. I'm going to even remember the Mars conjunction that happened in late Taurus. And right around that time, within a few days, we had the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. I think Mars will be just as feisty and active with its Jupiter conjunction because they're both in Gemini, which was ruled by Mercury, and it's going to be retrograde. Oh, may we please have peace on earth. And if you've been paying any attention to the Middle East, you may be aware that Israel assassinated the leader of Hamas, not taking any political sides here, and also the leader of Hezbollah. And don't even ask me who they are. but it could be, oh, leading us into an escalation of war in the Middle East. It's not going to help with any ceasefire efforts. Stay tuned. You might want to pay attention to that one a little bit during this Mercury retrograde cycle, because when it goes back retrograde into Leo, and that's where we have our rulers, whether they be presidents or kings or guerrilla warfare leaders. It's the leaders, so to speak. And so it could be a little more emphasized in this Mercury retrograde that we're going to be going through. So for most of us, on an individual level, this works collectively too, but on an individual level, Mercury retrograde in Virgo, we got to deal with all of our detail overloads, the confusion that creates, the indecision, the doubt, the procrastination, the excuse making. Those are all Virgo concepts. And so we can be quite quick with our left brain to see what isn't working, what is wrong. We break it down, okay? But we have to, again, remember that Pisces polarity to step back up, see that larger picture, simplify, prioritize, and then we can know how we work through some of those retrograde Virgo details. Mercury in any sign deals with our electronics. With Virgo, it can intensify the software issues. It can, intensify the hacking. I think it was some transportation stuff that created blackouts with the airlines. That happened in Mercury's pre-shadow before this retrograde cycle. So we can have some of those technological, electronic issues a little more emphasized with Mercury retrograde in Virgo. So again, if you seem overwhelmed with everything, slow down, breathe deep, reach for your intuition as best as you can. And Virgo being one of the earth elements, it's going to deal with resources, money, and finances. So again, with the stationary retrograde conjunction to Venus, what is of value to you in your material world? Mercury retrograde, what are you releasing? What are you no longer needing to process through or deal with in your material world? Now, it doesn't mean with Mercury retrograde that everybody will go through a loss of resources or an unexpected expense. It can be such that depending upon your prior efforts, you may have resource rewards just come up and surprise you with Mercury retrograde. There's never an absolute with any planetary archetype. And in evolutionary astrology, we have a tendency to say that any archetype can be distorted, meaning any of the 12 signs, any of the 12 houses, any of the planets. Any archetype can be distorted and any archetype can be naturally expressed. Now, Virgo Pisces relates to what we call the sadomasochistic patterns in evolutionary astrology. These are the human-made distortions, many times via religion. And so those patterns for us can be exposed in our world, or we may finally see it in somebody that we relate to. And it's like, oh, can we speak up and say something about it? Can we discuss it with them? What we have to watch with the distortions of Virgo is wanting to just tear everything down, tear down another person, another point of view, another belief system. It's that inner outer criticisms of Virgo. If you find criticism coming towards you, you can reflect and say, is this something that I'm doing that I'm not conscious of? And Mercury retrograde is going to make me more conscious so that I can change my thinking. I can change my communications. Maybe that might be it. If you're wanting to criticize the world out there, it also can reflect back to why are you wanting to tear something down? It's okay to look at something and go, this is how I can improve it, Virgo. This is how I can make it better. Okay. But what we have to be very careful with this archetype here is we have to watch that tendency to always see the cup half empty instead of being able to see the cup half full. Now, when we're dealing with that sadomasochistic patterning of Virgo, it's based upon this perfect universal being, old man, white beard, judging us on a cloud who's perfect. It creates that natural sense of guilt from our imperfections as humans, which are pretty easy to see. And so if we have guilt based with atonement, we want to play the victim. I deserve this for some reason. So we have to discover some healthy boundaries here. We have to learn how to say no. It's not right to treat me this way. We have to learn how to love ourselves. I like to say warts, farts, and all through our imperfections. And it's also then a time period to review our standards of right, wrong conduct. Maybe we're feeling guilty over something that is unnatural and it has nothing to do with us actually being guilty, conditioned guilt, as much of this is. The anger side to the guilt complex of sadomasochism is the victor. I am going to get them before they get me. I can do this. I can, be the tough man. Well, we may find that we'll run into some situations that will force us to have to change our attitudes and perhaps some of our behaviors. Here again, the more we can self-love, the better we can calm down so that we're not always so defensive or always wanting to play the aggressor doing the hurting. So where does it become necessary to review our words and actions with others? So all Mercury retrogrades make for repeated communications. However, when it's retrograde in its own sign, Virgo, it emphasizes that a little bit. And the whole thing about Virgo is being able to make the shift from Leo on top of the pyramid to Virgo, turning things upside down so that we can then hopefully work into that Libra balance. And so sometimes we may need to get our bubbles burst. We might have what we call those Virgo humiliations, bursting the Leonian bubble, in order to move to some of that equality with others. This is also an archetype where we learn service. Now, again, if you're a little bit on that workaholic side, you can be of service. But if you're going to go do, the extremes of service to another, that may not be healthy boundaries. So where is it that you want to participate and be helpful with others, not only in communications, but also in your giving and receiving? And how is that balancing for you? How is it? It's going to be unique for each of us. But one of the biggest things that you need to remember with Virgo is the natural expression of Virgo is very gentle and self-loving. I do love myself, warts, farts, and all. And that gentleness of Virgo is where we are the natural Florence Nightingale. We're the natural giver. And again, it might be a little adjustments, learning to do it in healthy ways instead of overgiving and then getting upset because nobody gives back to the degree you do. And that might be a lesson to just kind of hold back and let someone learn something for themselves. It also includes the archetype of diet, exercise, and rest. This is one of the best ways we can self-love, is to take care of the temple of our soul, which is that body. And again, with Virgo, and especially with Mercury retrograde in Virgo, it's about try until we make those baby steps of self-improvement. And it's like the bicycle ride, learning to ride the bicycle. It doesn't matter how many times you fall off, you got to get up one more time. So you can replace bicycle with any issue that you're trying to make self-improvement with. It matters that you just try one more time and one more time. Mercury retrograde in Virgo is the perfect time to throw off old patterns, shake it up enough to really implement new patterns in your world that you would like to see. Now, Mercury's going to go retrograde back into Leo. Most of its retrograde cycle will be in Leo. And this is where we're going to have to revisit inner and outer love. If our world is based upon insecurity, it can create all those traumas to be the center of attention, to be noticed, to suck up all the oxygen in the room, because it's reflecting that we've got to get it out here because we don't have it inwardly. If we are working on being inwardly secure and inwardly loving ourselves, then we start to realize the outer world is just a reflection. And whatever we don't like in the outer world, it starts here with changing it. And this is an opportunity to do it through this retrograde cycle. Oh, by the way, because Mercury retrograde reverses through the elements, next summer, the retrograde will start in July. I can't remember dates necessarily. I've got it on the end of the slides here. But next summer, the Mercury retrograde is going to be entirely in Leo. So you might want to pay attention to some of this Leo stuff right now, because we're going to revisit it in a year in the next Mercury retrograde. So it's an opportunity for us with the Aquarius polarity to objectify our world and try to heal anywhere we have an emotional arrest of wounding. This is Leo following Cancer, because if we have Cancer woundings with our inner child and we do not address them as adults, they can become emotional arrests, and we go into adulthood and we project that out there onto our partners. And the most typical thing is a child who cannot be acknowledged or understood by their parents for whatever they are unique about to the depth of their soul. So this is an opportunity for you at whatever age you are at to revisit that and to self-acknowledge your uniqueness. It might be a time period, if you have children, that you have to readdress these things with your child. Do the best to see them for who they really are. And of course, if you have adult parents, it can be a time period to also review some of the issues with them. It may be such that with adult children and elderly parents, that there might be some dementia issues setting in, and it might not be there for the elderly parent to make the change anymore, but it does not stop you as a searching adult to do your own forgiveness with the elderly parent, to accept your responsibility for needing to make the changes in your world, however that is necessary. So as you can see, with Mercury retrograde in Leo, there can be some karma that we have to work through individually and collectively with children. How many times do we have to have another story in the news about children getting hurt or killed, or just suffering the abuses of this patriarchal, distorted world we live in? Pray for peace. Pisces polarity to Virgo. Do the best you can with your children. And so, again, reviewing that karma around children and parenting, I'm kind of repeating myself there. I'll skip over that one. One of the other archetypes of Mercury retrograde in Leo is what we will call the starving artist syndrome. Leo is creativity. It is self-actualization. It is where we want to fully express ourselves like the sun does, as it gives life to our solar system. And sometimes we want to be acknowledged and seen for something that we think is important. But if it's coming from any Leonian ego, it will not be noticed by the world. And this is where we have to go to that Aquarius polarity and really objectify, what does the universe need from us versus what do we want to project on to the universe. And so it's part of the picture of helping us understand that everyone is unique and everyone is creative and everyone has a social role to play in the universe. It also is teaching us that if we want to be the center of our world, we have a role to play, but we don't get to play God. Universal source is the big kahuna. I created some mantras for the 12 archetypes many, many moons ago. And the one for Leo is I will, my will, divine will. I will, my will, divine will. And so you could work with this one during Mercury retrograde. And any insecurities that will come up through this whole self-actualization, it's opportunities to love yourself better. And one of the biggest things to realize with creativity is that nature is abundant. Just ask a gardener. Poor Leroy. He's like, he's very sweet in the fact that we have a lot of traveling in the summer. We do whole house rentals, and we have for a long time. And so I become the laundress in addition to everything else. But we've turned into this patterning of what next, what next, what next. And so we check off our Virgo list. And so one of the things that we created a long time ago in our yard of flowers and flowers and flowers is anytime we had to deadhead one of the flower beds, we were taking seeds to the seed bank and we were making a deposit, and it was all going to come back to us. And it has, maybe not in the way we entirely expected it to, but it comes back with abundance for us. And so think about that on an energetic level with Mercury and see if you can work with that cup half empty to cup half full, however you want to, however you need to. So just a slide on each of the polarities. When Mercury's retrograde in Leo, it points to the Aquarius polarity. It's about developing mental objectivity, Mercury conscious mind, Uranus ruler of Aquarius, individuated unconscious mind. And so we can have things popping up into consciousness. How well can we step outside the immediacy of the situation, see that larger picture, and what is that role that we are to play in it? Now, as Pluto is going into Aquarius, and I've been kind of teaching some webinars on that, I came up with 4 words for Aquarius: detach, objectify, liberate, innovate. Detach from the immediacy of the situation, objectify it as best as you can. Where do you have to break free and liberate? And then how are you going to innovate and fill that space up with something new instead of going backward? Fixed modality of Aquarius. If you happen to have any shocks or traumas through this Mercury retrograde, the purpose of those upsets is to expand your perspective. You know, oh gosh, I want to say Jeffrey Green used to say 80 to 85% of us are born with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's probably higher than that. Find someone who hasn't been born with it. They're there, but they're kind of rare souls. And so we all go through upsets from time to time. And when we have that intense cataclysm, do we regress or do we egress and evolve? That is the ultimate purpose of our upsets, even though it doesn't feel like it when it's happening. Now, with the Aquarius polarity, you want to pay attention to any future-orientated messages that come again, 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 again. That's where your own soul is trying to move forward. And this is where, again, fixed modality, we've got to find that courage to act. Because sometimes fixed modality just wants to stay in the comfort. And of course, are we searching for like-minded individuals to create new friendships, social groups, social causes? And do we have some potential for new leadership roles? If you live in the United States and you've been following anything with the USA presidential election, we've had some pretty interesting upsets in the last, what's it been, 10 days now or something like that. More on that and a little bit of slides coming up. But again, with that Aquarius polarity, it's about looking for fairness and equality for everyone. What is best for all of us, not just the few. And so when Mercury is retrograde in Virgo, we've had that Pisces polarity. And as it goes direct and then goes back into Virgo, we can still feel the energy of this Pisces polarity. Where do we need to simplify our life and prioritize what is truly important in our world? And that can include finding the quiet time to really hear what universal source is trying to convey. Because Mercury being left brain, we have our outer voice and we have our inner voice. And I mean the quiet inner voice, not just your inside voice. I mean that quiet inner voice. And Mercury retrograde always points to the right brain. So we want to, again, make that time to slow down, quiet down, give ourselves an ability to inwardly hear. Now, on this retrograde cycle with the Virgo Pisces polarity, there might be some religious and spiritual breakthroughs, because if we're stressed, we all want to feel safe. We all want inner and outer peace. How can we go about creating that? And what we've had happen in the United States, which has a constitution based upon separation of church and state, we have this whole concept of Christian nationalism that, has totally almost walked away from the teachings of Jesus, the evolved human, to feed the poor and hungry, to take care of helping others, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so we see that being more and more exploited with conservatives in this country. Will this Mercury retrograde expose some of this and change some of it? Will we realize the hypocrisy of some of the statements? Stay tuned, we'll find out. Now, with this Pisces polarity through this Mercury retrograde, it can be an excellent time to get in nature, to relate with all other species, to do that deep breath, to take that connecting with others, to recognize the equality of all species on planet Earth. It can be searching for common language and emotional connections. When we can't quite find them, can we agree to disagree and be peaceful? I had somebody get mad at me in a public setting recently and walk out the door. We were sharing a meal, and my Sagittarian nature spoke up and said, well, I really don't think cattle belong in the Black Hills. We need to have them out on the prairies. That was the wrong thing to say. And I tried to smooth things over and relate with the fact that I grew up on a farm, the oldest of three girls. I did cattle chores till I was 26 years old. I have a little bit of experience, but nope, didn't go there. So sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't work. But if we can recognize that there's many paths home, and if we can just recognize that that path to perfecting, Virgo, is one foot in front of another. So how can we speak to and act upon the evolution of our beliefs as Mercury is retrograde in Virgo and pointing to Pisces, the last of the 12 archetypes? All right, those are some of the our main themes for this particular Mercury retrograde. I'm going to take a drink. I have been watching the little chat board. My chat board is actually the little things up there. So if anybody has burning questions, I guess we'll type them in the chat board if you want to. Otherwise, thank you very much for letting me rattle away. I'm going to move into the aspects Mercury makes with some charts. But first of all, take a little drink. And Leroy, because you're listening, we're going to have to find somebody with more Zoom experience to maybe help us with a little bit of our techno stuff as well. But we can address that at another point. So in the world of evolutionary astrology, in all astrology, actually. Mercury moves so fast, it makes lots of aspects. And we use the 0 to 360 cycle of aspects and phases to see how active it really is. Here it is on your screen. The first person who really brought that out was Dane Rudier in his book, The Lunation Cycle with the Sun and the Moon. Jeffrey Green, excuse my burp. Jeffrey Green expanded it to all planets. And you start with the slower moving planet, that's the 0 point, and you go counterclockwise with the faster moving planet to see their phasal relationship and whether or not there's an aspect. You want more information on that? I've been teaching astrology a long time, got lots of stuff on our website with it. Here's the aspects that Mercury is making. It always aspects Venus. Most of the time it aspects Mars. And then we see right here in this time, we've got the 4 outer planets. I include Chiron nowadays. And it's also aspecting the nodal axis, although it won't show up because it is sometimes what we call that minor aspect. So as we start to go through the aspects here again, everything we're looking at for the most part will be from mid-July to mid-September, pre-shadow, retrograde, post-shadow. All right. So here is the Mercury retrograde interior conjunction, which my slides not, never mind, August 18th at about 26.5 degrees. Here was that Jupiter-Mars conjunction that I told you about that's going to happen on August 14th at 16.75. Will we have more violence with all the changes that have happened with Biden withdrawing and endorsing Kamala Harris, who seems to be jumping straight forward? Will we see more things happen in that area? Stay tuned. I do have her chart coming up. But right on the heels of Jupiter conjuncting Mars, we have the interior retrograde conjunction on the 18th, followed the next day by the first Jupiter waxing square to Saturn out of 3. They are now 1/4 of the way around the circle from their 1 conjunction at 0.5 Aquarius of the winter solstice 2020. Those first quarter squares are crises in manifesting, crises in action. We've got to bring the new out there. What comes into this picture, though, is the fact that along with that, Venus is going to make a opposition to Saturn, and it's going to make first quarter squares to Jupiter and then Mars right during that time period. Remember when Mercury went retrograde for Virgo, Jupiter was, I think, at 6, or Venus, excuse me, was it 6 degrees Virgo? Venus is still active in this retrograde cycle coming in and activating a T-square. And so it's going to intensify reviewing our beliefs, Saturn in Pisces, reviewing what we value with Venus, and reviewing our relationships and dealing with all of these communication skills, right, wrong, who's clinging to yesterday, who's trying to move forward. But we also have, with this Jupiter Mars square, we have trines from the moon on the interior conjunction day, the day before. Moon will move beyond that in the latter part of Aquarius as time goes by. But I thought, in mundane astrology, the moon is public sentiment. The moon is the collective emotional ebb and flows of the people. And so the US has, in July 4th charts of 1776, moon in Aquarius. It varies depending on what time you use, but here's the moon coming around in Aquarius on this interior conjunction and lining up with the USA moon. And it was kind of fascinating to go over everything the last 2 weeks. I'm going to put my filter out here. I am not a friend of Donald Trump. I think he's a liar, and I think he's a fraud, and I think he's what's that word? Misogynist. Sorry, if you're looking for truth, he is not it. He just blows me away how he can say the opposite thing of what is truth and the opposite thing of what he's been accusing at, and play that 12th house Pluto victim role like no tomorrow. Well, maybe some people have bought into it, but I'm not a friend. So I went through some pretty deep depression after the debate. I didn't watch the debate. We were camping. And I started reading news feeds after the debate, and I just sunk into a funk. And I was there and I watched that groundswell come up. And then when he had the wisdom, but also had the reality check that if Biden stayed in the race, it was over. And then to watch him, probably the most natural thing for him to do, and endorse Kamala Harris. But then to watch that groundswell that came through for her, I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, talk about a pendulum swing. Donald Trump and the Republicans had the debate and they had their convention, and then all of a sudden things shifted. I am wondering if I think it's quite possible that this Democratic unity and groundswell for Kamala is just going to carry forward. Way before any of this happened, the beginning of the year, when I saw that the Jupiter retrograde in Gemini was going to go over his Gemini Sag polarity, most of it 3 times, I was like, I'm wondering about this guy's mental acuity himself. And will it, will he have so much stress because he's somewhat unhealthy in diet, exercise, and rest? Will he have some mental issues of his own that are exposed? Stay tuned. I do not work with Sabian symbols, so I don't know the Sabian symbol for 17 degrees, but there is probably something there when you look at that chart. Let me move on. Mercury is always aspecting Venus. As I said, they're going to have one conjunction, and then Venus is going to pull ahead in the sky, which means you're going to see it easier and easier in the evening skies. I like Venus as an evening star. And so they're going to have that conjunction, though, at almost 4 degrees Virgo, just where Mercury went stationary retrograde. So it can create doubt again, and it can bring up reviews of what's really important to us. How do I see my cup half full instead of half empty? Needs to be what we really are working with as Mercury makes. It'll be the 3rd conjunction Mercury is making to Venus. They go back and forth, usually every other year, 1 conjunction a year, 3 conjunctions a year. It's not always every other year, but more or less that. And so when we have those years with 3 Mercury Venus conjunctions, usually there's a Venus retrograde somewhere in the picture. But it just puts extra emphasis on Venus's values. What's important, what's important, what's important. Now, as Mercury falls behind Venus, that's the balsamic phase between them. They don't go 360. They go, Mercury goes before and after Venus like this from our perspective. Okay, geocentric perspective. But when it's waning Venus, it really kind of points to balsamic phase and needing to be quiet so that we can deeply inwardly hear what's important in my world. And what can happen is when Mercury retrogrades back to Leo and it has that waning semi-sextile, the Leonian part of ourself wants to go into the control. How can we breathe and ask questions and let go? How can we shift our values? Mercury's making a lot of waxing aspects to planets, 3 waxing sextiles to Mars over the course of about a 3-month time period. That is going to then give us a pretty, several months here to get in touch with our desires and what do we want to do with it? Well, what do we want to create? You know, Mars, ruler of Aries' first house. We're always in process of becoming leading edge of our desired nature. And it's not, Mars is not going to have a retrograde cycle till this winter. Then it'll be in Leo Cancer. It won't come back to 4 degrees Cancer. You can see on your screen. But we've got some real good energy over the course of this summer to build and act. And of course, Mars is going through Gemini right now with the interior or with a retrograde sextile. And so, what to do, what to do, what to do, what's inspiring us, what can we do, and what can we not do? How do we prioritize or concentrate versus just doing this and doing that all over the place and wondering why nothing is working out for us? Jeffrey Green always said that waxing sextiles were important choice points because the choices made at the 60-degree mark carry through the rest of the way around the 360-degree cycle. So there you go. Mercury Mars really wants to express itself, communicate, and take action. What's showing up for you? Mercury makes waxing trines to Chiron. So we can be inspired to love ourselves, to heal ourselves, to allow our creativities to blossom. Chiron can include that diet, exercise, and rest. All right. Make the most of conversations. We've got 2 fire signs going on, and everybody wants to talk, and everybody wants to talk, and everybody wants to talk. Can you listen as well as you speak? And when we listen, we have opportunities to really grow. Oh, okay, that's a new idea. Now, some of the distortions that may show up is that we always want to be first, best, most, me, Aries. And we can also, even with these waxing trines and fire signs, turn it into me versus them. And I got to get them before they get me fight. So what you want to ask for with these waxing trines is, how do I celebrate the creativity of others as much as I do myself? So at this point, I'm just going to bring in the USA chart that I use. And here's the article that recaps all the research. I think it was about 3 years ago, I started switching to Michael Munkasi's chart of 9:37 a.m., which gives us the 5th house Pluto for the USA. And it's based upon his research from 1989 when Congress released newly discovered letters of Benjamin Franklin, who was quoted as saying that they signed the Declaration of Independence between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. So this is the background on the chart that I use. And any July 4th chart, as you can see, with the squares in opposition, has both inclusive versus exclusive trends. That's why we go back and forth between give me you're tired, you're poor with the Statue of Liberty and build a wall. So this is the interior retrograde conjunction that we are going to have. And what happens in this Mercury retrograde? Remember I said that we have Moon in Aquarius for the July 4th charts. In the Virgo rising chart, the moon is at about 22 degrees, 22.5 Aquarius. Well, the Mercury retrograde then creates 3 oppositions. It can intensify the polarity of our public opinions and all that, elitism versus the common person that goes round and round, that can be distorted in multiple ways. But it also, there is a little bit of potential here to recognize the greater good. Can we see that with the masses? I mean, the young generations going on TikTok and creating all these little memes about Kamala Harris, the spontaneous Zoom calls that are going on by this group, that group, this group, that group, that can be a part of that groundswell of the masses who feel energized because we don't have the choice between 2 or 3 older men, if you want to include Kennedy running for office. we're going to have a full moon. Okay, so here's the interior conjunction again, August 18th. And remember, we had that new moon earlier when Mercury went retrograde. Well, now we're going to have a full moon that's going to come at this 27 degrees Leo Aquarius mark. That's going to be right in here with that interior retrograde conjunction that we're going to see. And so pay attention through this Mercury retrograde. It could be a quite revealing. You know, Mercury, the messenger, it may really bring out what is going to be the switcheroo with what is happening recently. But I also, in case you haven't recognized this, the USA is having a natal Chiron return. We have Chiron at about 20 degrees Aries, no matter what time on July 4th. And Chiron's going to go over its natal position, which happens about every 50, 51 years, 3 times in 24, 25. And I look at this and I go, after the presidential election, half the country is going to be celebrating and half the country is going to be commiserating. Is there a possibility, or is there any way we could by any chance start to self-heal and possibly come together for the greater good as a country? Stay tuned, looking at it a little bit longer term. Again, Pluto's going to retrograde back into Capricorn, but I think it's 26, 27. We will have Pluto go over the USA South Node. Stay tuned. We're going to see, it's a little long to forecast. We got to see how this election goes. See, you know, are we going to go with our exclusive trends, or are we going to go with our inclusive trends? We'll find out a lot depending on how this election turns out. Mercury's going to make waxing squares to Uranus. This is the harsh aspect of Mercury retrograde. This is the surprises and upsets. You know, this is the you know, traumas we can experience. This is where we could have a need to retreat backwards for security reasons. And yet Mercury retrograde is asking, can we let go of old egoic behaviors and ideas in Leo, especially ones that no longer serve us? Can we self-love, lessen our defensiveness? And because it is the first quarter square, crises in action, there is the potential to realize and activate new creativity. And that can include new ways of manifesting resources in our world, as Uranus is in the latter degrees of Taurus. Uranus is getting ready to turn retrograde. So you can see Mercury retrograde, the second square. There it is right there within 5 minutes of Uranus turning retrograde. Stay tuned. We'll see how it goes, but just recognize for yourself as an individual, if you're working to internalize security and you're paying attention to those future-orientated messages, that waxing square, you can make leaps forward. It provides the energy to make a big shift and change however you want to, even if it's just with your thought processes of seeing your world as being better off than worse off, so to speak. But it can also be part of helping you with change as well, if you want. Now, here's where I'm going to bring in Donald Trump's chart. And the reason for that is because throughout 2024, transiting Saturn in Pisces in his 7th house is going to make 3 last quarter squares to Uranus in Gemini. There's those 17-degree marks again, everyone. Transiting Jupiter, again, this is the interior conjunction, and he actually has his natal Uranus at 1753 in Gemini. And then in late 24, early 25, Uranus is transiting that late Taurus, and it's going to be making 3 last quarter squares to his Mars going on. Now here's the Jupiter transits. It's going to go over its North Node Uranus, first time August, September, and then opposed Moon, South Node, and then it's going to retrograde back in October, November, and it'll make the third passage in the spring of next year. Okay, I saw somebody type something in, so bear with me, everybody. I'm going to see if I can read it, see if it's a comment. Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to do that. There, oh, somebody looked it up. Oh my gosh, thank you, Lindsay. The Sabian symbol for 17 degrees Aquarius from Rudier, Dane Rudier, a man's secret motives are being publicly unmasked. Whew. Oh. Well, I guess there is something to those Sabian symbols. I always thought there were. It's just not my forte in studying astrology. Thank you very much, Lindsay, for saying that. Did another one just come up? Hold on, I'm learning. 17 Gemini, Rudier. 2 Chinese men converse in their native tongue in an American city. Oh, so to me, that one would be, even though he's saying 2 Chinese men, if you want to extrapolate very broadly, Kamala Harris has 1 Asian parent, South Asian parent, but what I flashed in is these 2 presidential candidates back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And yeah, I just get the feeling that Kamala Harris can chew him up, or at least stand up to him and take back some oxygen in the room. And so again, before the change, I had seen these Jupiter transits in Gemini. And in evolutionary astrology, Uranus rules the physical brain. It rules the synapses that snap off together to create information. It rules the dendrites, where we actually store the information as we go through our learning curve. What fires together, wires together, is a saying for the brain and how we can get so conditioned. But you know, the brain with its Uranus with its polarity to the sun, you know, has rulerships with Uranus strokes, Sun heart attacks. And that's with, again, Uranus Aquarius ruling brain, Sun Leo ruling heart. So I always wondered if he would stress himself out, or if we would see his own dementia show up more and more. I mean, it's already there if you listen to him talk about planes not being able to fly with electric batteries and whatever he said about sharks, which I don't remember. Just that mental wildness that can happen with Gemini. Stay tuned. We shall see. One of the things, oh, I'll show you this one. Hold on. Let me get this going. Okay, got to get this going. There. One of the things that I started to do, and again, I'll talk about this in the beginning of October for the JWFG conference, is I have a tendency, especially if the moon changes signs on election day, and it did it in 2020, and it's doing it again in 2024. The moon starts out in Sagittarius, so we might see an instant replay from what happened in 2020, and here it is in late Sag, and you know, Trump thinks he's winning, and then we're going to see it move into Capricorn, and it's got an extremely tight moon square with a transiting nodal axis on his Neptune Eris. And I saw that and I was kind of like, oh, could this be the public starting to become practical and say, we really do not want 4 more years of Donald Trump? Stay tuned. We shall see. But I thought I'd put that out there. On election day, solar arc Saturn right here okay, just past his south node. On election day, solar arc Saturn will make an exact square to his Mercury. And, this can be perhaps some harshness in communications or messaging. He might have his loyal followers, blindly emotional to him. But where is that split going to go with this solar arc Saturn in Libra? Stay tuned. We can see a lot happen in the next 90 some days. And then it's going to be more, there'll be more after that. And I'll show you that in a moment. Let's walk with finishing up here with Mercury waxing Neptune. And that's the waxing in conjuncts or quincunx. And, Neptune finishing up these last degree of its own sign, finishing up a 165-year cycle of religious and spiritual evolution. Neptune's going to be retrograde throughout all these aspects. It's going to dissolve anything in our desired nature that is not in our highest and best soul's evolution. Because it's a waxing in conjunct, this is going to emphasize Mercury retrograde going through the inner adjustments, the inner analyzations. Here, Mercury Virgo can be helpful if we make the effort to look at what it is about ourselves that we need to change. If we don't want to, we may find necessary upsets and humiliations if we are resisting evolving ourselves mentally. And so we're being asked to self-love and heal in ourselves, our family, those we relate to. We're being, asked to make those adjustments in our consciousness, Mercury, of how we need to love ourselves better, take care of ourselves better. How do we do it with others as well? Now, the interesting thing then is Mercury is waning in conjuncts with Pluto. Pluto's retrograde through all of it. The tail end one's going to be back into Capricorn. Waning in conjuncts are outer adjustment. Waxing in conjuncts 150 degrees, inner adjustments. Waning in conjuncts 210 degrees, outer adjustments. Now, it's not an absolute, okay? It can ebb back and forth, but the major themes are that way. And so what we're going to have is Pluto in Aquarius and retrograding back to Capricorn. It's going to have the last word on what we can and cannot do. So Mercury, communications, they're going to run into the limits of our power in the outer world. It's possible someone like Donald spouts out more and more and more extreme, and he just turns off more and more people. Stay tuned. But what we all want to do is we want to merge with greater sources of power in order to evolve. That's the waning in conjuncts, those outer adjustments. Oh, I am not all powerful. I am being, forced to look at those larger sources of power. Am I going to align with the separating sources of power? Lie, cheat, manipulate. 210 degrees is the natural zero Scorpio. Or am I going to align with returning sources of power and really try and understand what is best for all of us on the planet Earth? Stay tuned. We will find out on that. And one more, Mercury is, the way I look at it, the South Node is waning semi-squares to Mercury retrograde. And this is recognizing how our relationships are evolving with the intent to create more meaningful, equitable connections. It's balsamic, it's the opposite. The North Node in Aries is waxing sesquisquadrates, okay, moving into that gibbous phase to Mercury retrograde. And here we have to balance our need for independence and freedom with others having the same need. Learning to adjust to new equities or resorting to dramas and fighting to retain for all the control. So the nodal axis is going to teach us it's not just about me, North Node Aries, it's about all of us, South Node Libra. Might be a little uncomfortable with all of that, but it's going to be part of the flavors influencing everything. Here's what I wanted to get to. Mercury turning stationary direct on August 28th. And what I wanted to point out to Here it is, 21, 24 Leo. But what I wanted to point out too is that here we have this yod with Mercury throughout its retrograde cycle with Neptune and Pluto, and Mercury's at the apex of it. So how are we adjusting to those larger forces in the world? Are we struggling for control? Can we utilize this Mercury retrograde, especially when it's in Virgo, to make whatever changes are necessary in attitudes and behaviors? So why Mercury, yes, has those waxing squares to Uranus, which can blow things up. Don't neglect the discomfort of the inconjuncts with Neptune and Pluto. We really will kind of be taken out of our comfort zones and asked to evolve consciously, asked to evolve mentally. All the best with that. I mean, it's just the natural cycles coming through. Here's Kamala's chart, okay? And I am doing it with Mercury stationary direct, the chart I just showed you, because Mercury goes direct at 21-24. Her natal Mars is 21-17. It doesn't get back quite to it, but it goes stationary direct. And this is Mercury's energy to resolve things and really move forward. So both Kamala and Donald Trump have Mars in Leo. Does Kamala continue her momentum with the Mercury stationary direct, with the Mars, and then Jupiter on her ascendant, and then on her North Node in Gemini? Both of them have the nodal axis in Gemini Sag, but Donald Trump has the Jupiter retrograde in Gemini 3 times on his nodes, 3 times on Uranus opposing his moon. It's a lot more active in his chart. And again, I get a little concerned about his mental fracturing. And concern is a word I'm using broadly. It might be reaping what you sow. With Kamala having the Jupiter stationary direct, it'll be right inside the 12th house. Here's the thing to recognize about the next Mercury retrograde cycle. It's going to be from 23 Sag to 6 degrees Sag. It'll be all in her 12th house, but it'll come very close to her nodal axis. Not hitting it, does it mean that she can avoid some of the drama? The next Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius will turn stationary retrograde on Donald Trump's moon and south node, and it will oppose all of his Gemini planets, so it won't back off. My hope is that her momentum keeps going and that Trump has a major meltdown in the next Mercury retrograde. Stay tuned, we shall see, and I'll speak about that a little closer at the online conference. Here's her chart for polls closing. Now, yes, they close later in the Western time zones, but it's still been a reference chart for me that has worked. You can see this in her chart, but here's the North Node in her 10th. Here's that moon again. And I'm thinking that moon moving into Capricorn, we don't want to be flying off the handle of the Sagittarian wildness. We want practicality. We want governance. We want democracy. We even want Constitution honored. That's some of the more natural expressions of Capricorn. And so will the moon in her 7th house say, yes, this is the person we want to go forward? I hope so. I'm not going to take the time to go into other stuff. I will briefly point out here is the female warrior coming out for her. This is a pretty tight conjunction right here with the Uranus Jupiter. surprising her with the power and resources that comes with a presidency. The Saturn one, can she be potentially working to help heal the country? Maybe not for mega groups, but definitely for a fair amount of the masses moving forward. And so now I'm just going to go through the rest of the slides pretty fast, but here's your words for Mercury retrograde Virgo-Leo. How do I quiet my mind and relax? How do I pace myself throughout the day with all the details? How do I prioritize all the activity in my life? How do I energize my connection to source? How do I unconditionally love myself and others? How do I release what is no longer in my highest and best good? How do I express my unique creative talents with the world? All right, so here is the dates and degrees of that next Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, which, by the way, will be with Jupiter retrograde in Gemini, and they are both retrograde at the same time in each other's signs, mutually receptive. I feel somewhat like no matter who wins the USA presidential election, it's still going to be a bunch of chaos. And we already have a lot of conservative circles trying to undermine counting ballots. Pennsylvania wouldn't let, the Republicans in Pennsylvania would not let their local election authorities start counting ballots before election day. And that's what created the mess in 2020. Trump was ahead when the polls were closing. And then as the days went by and Pennsylvania was the last one to count its ballots and Joe Biden pulled ahead by 10,000 points and won the election, that same setup is going to go on because, again, Pennsylvania could not get the laws changed. 16 states changed laws since 2020 to allow the counting of mail-in ballots before election day. Pennsylvania did not. Could easily look for a repeat, which is why I think that Kamala Harris is probably going to choose Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, as her running mate. I think him and Mark Kelly would both be great candidates, but there's she needs Pennsylvania to go forward. So that's my forecast guess right there. Anyway, I'm now going to just move forward with slides for people who might be some beginners. If there's anybody who wants to make any comments or ask any questions in the chat pane, you are more than welcome to do so. And here are all of the Mercury events by date that I mentioned on these slides in chronological order. I usually put these in here for everybody so that if you kind of just want to refer to them, you have the option to do so. Beginners, here is Mercury astronomy, and here is why Mercury is always the sign before, the same as or the sun sign after the sun sign. From Earth, it never looks to get more than 29 degrees away. Here's the visual of how we would look at Mercury if we plotted it in the skies. This is actually any planetary retrograde making their 3 passages. Here are the Mercury archetypes of outer Mercury, as I call it. Its rulership of Gemini and the 3rd house. Outer due to the active polarity, energy moving out from the center. Here's the inner side of Mercury ruling Virgo in the 6th house. Inner being passive polarity, energy moving back to the center. And here are just some generic things about Mercury retrograde that we can kind of have a little bit of a repeat with it in Virgo. And so that's the last of my slides. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to just rattle through that pretty fast. Any comments or questions? Otherwise, we shall let you go.